Once again, good evening, everyone. I'm going to continue the reporting on Chapter 5, Historical Development of American Education. So, Miss Andrea, the first reporter, talks about the colonial period, also the early national period, and the movement toward public schooling. And for the second part of the Chapter 5, we will talk about the development of American secondary schools, the American College and University, education in culturally diverse society, and the two closing historical issues. So first, we're going to talk about the development of American secondary schools. So in this section, we will examine how the public high schools completed the ladder. So under the development of American secondary schools, we have the academy forerunner of the high school. We also have the high school, the secondary school organization, and lastly, the development of educational technology. And we will discuss first about the academy, the forerunner of the high school. So initiated by Benjamin Franklin, the academies replace a colonial period. The latter grammar schools as the major secondary schools in the first half of the 19th century. So by 1855, more than 6,000 U.S. academies enrolled 263,000 students. Unlike the Latin grammar schools, which were exclusively attended by males preparing for college entry, academies were both single-sex and coeducational. So they offered a college preparatory as well as a wide range of other programs. So the academy programs followed three patterns. The first is the traditional college preparatory curriculum with emphasis on Latin and Greek. The second one, the English language program, which is the general curriculum for those planning to their formal education with completion of the secondary school. And the third one, it calls the normal course, which prepared elementary school teachers. Next would be the high school. In the late 19th and early 20th centuries, the states passed compulsory attendance that established the age range that students had to attend the school. So while students could attend approved non-public schools, the states set a minimum standards for all schools. So in the late 19th and early 20th century, the convergence of several significant socio-economic and educational trends created a favorable climate for the establishment of high schools. So the United States changed from an agricultural and rural society to an industrial and urban nation. Additionally, in 1892, the National Education Association, or NIA, established the Committee of Ten. This chaired by the Harvard University president Charles Eliot to define the high school's mission and purposes. So the committee made two important recommendations. The first one, the subject should be taught uniformly for both college preparatory students and those who completed their formal education upon graduation. And lastly, or the second one, 8 years of elementary and 4 years of secondary education, in which we also apply here in the Philippines. The third one would be the secondary school organization. By the 1920s, four curricular patterns were evident in high schools. The first one, the college preparatory program, which included English language and literature, foreign languages, mathematics, natural and physical sciences, and history and social studies. That's the first one. The second one, the commercial or business program with courses in bookkeeping, shorthand, and typing. The third one is industrial, vocational, home economics, and agricultural program. And lastly, a general academic program for students who would complete their formal education upon graduation. And then, lastly, for the development of American secondary schools, the development of educational technology. Since the mid 20th century, American schools have integrated educational technology into their classrooms. Using technology in classroom instructions is an important component of pre-service teacher education programs. Competency in educational technology is mandated by many state certification programs and is a standard in professional teacher accreditation. So the educational technology entered the schools in the 1920s with the introduction of radio and motion pictures. Although these innovations were often add-ons rather than integrated into the curriculum, they refuse instructions with dynamic audio and visual elements. So we're done with the development of American secondary schools. Now let's proceed to the American college and university. Colleges were established in North America as early as the colonial period of the 17th century when Protestant denominations established church affiliated and church controlled institutions. So, believing that well educated ministers were needed to establish Christianity in the New World. And the Massachusetts General Court chartered the Harvard College in 1636, and by 1754, Yale, Williams, and Mary, Princeton, and King's College, later a Columbia University, had also been established as a church-affiliated institutions of higher learning. And other colonial colleges were the University of Pennsylvania, Dartmouth, Brown, and Rogers. So the general colonial colleges curriculum included in the year one about the Latin, Greek, Hebrew, rhetoric, and logic. For the year two, it talks about the Greek, Hebrew, logic, and natural philosophy. And for the year three, it's all about the natural philosophy, metaphysics, and ethics. And for the last year, we have this mathematics and the review of Greek, Latin, logic, and natural philosophy. So we're done with the American college and university. Now let's proceed to education in a culturally diverse society. Under the education in culturally diverse society, we have African Americans, Native Americans, Latino Americans, Asian Americans, Arab Americans, and the immigration controversy. So let's start with the African Americans. But historically, the United States has been just as it's today, a racially and ethnically diverse nation with the exemption of the Native Americans. American roots trace to other continents, especially to Europe, Africa, and Asia. So this section, we will examine the historical experience of African, Latino, Asian, and Arab Americans in American education. And we will talk first about the African Americans. The Civil War, and called it the Emancipation, Emancipation Proclamation, Reconstruction, and the 13th Amendment ended slavery in the United States. Okay, and emancipation brought with its challenge of educating the freedmen and the women and their children, especially in the South. So in 1865, Congress established the Freedmen's Bureau to provide economic and educational assistance to African Americans in the South during the Reconstruction period. So under the leadership of General O. Howard, the Bureau established schools that by 1869 enrolled 114,000 African American students. So the beauty schools follow the new England Common Schools curriculum of reading, writing grammar, geography, arithmetic, and music, and especially singing. So many schools functioned until 1872 when bureau operations ended. Now let's proceed to the Native Americans. Education among pre-Columbian Native Americans was largely informal. So children learn skills, social rules, and cultural patterns from their group's oral traditions, from parents and elders, and direct experience with tribal life. So from 1890, 1890 to the 1930s, the BIA used the boarding schools to implement the assimilationist educational policy. So the boarding schools emphasize a basic curriculum of reading, writing, arithmetic, and vocational training, which is ruled by the military discipline and also the Native American youngsters in these schools. And we have they are also forbidden to speak their native languages. We're forced to use the English language. Now let's proceed to the Latino Americans. Latino Americans comprise the fastest growing ethnic group in the United States. So the Latino, a collective term, identifies Spanish speaking people whose ethnic groups originated in Mexico, Puerto Rico, and Cuba, and also in the other Latin American countries. Although Latino Americans may speak Spanish as a common language and share many Spanish traditions, each group has its own distinctive culture. And public schools within the Bilingual Education Act in 1968 and the Supreme Court decisions in Lovin Nichols 1974 replaced the assimilationists and the term Americanization. It is the policies which bilingual and multicultural educational programs. And also recently, bilingual education has become the politically controversial, with some states making English the official language, led by the California in 1998. And there are several states have ended their bilingual education programs. Now let's proceed to Asian Americans. Whereas the European immigrants entered the United States from the Atlantic coast, principally New York City, and Asian Americans came by way of the Pacific, especially Los Angeles and San Francisco. So, for these geographical reasons, the Asian American population concentrated historically in the western states bordering the Pacific Ocean. So, from there, Asian Americans moved eastward, and Chinese and Japanese were the first Asians to settle in the United States. And more recent Asian immigrants include also Filipinos, Indians, Thais, Koreans, Vietnamese, Laotians, and Cambodians. And also, we will talk about the Arab Americans. The designation or term Arab, it is a cultural and linguistic rather than a racial term. It refers to those who speak Arabic as their first language. An Arab American is an American of Arabic descent, and the majority of Arab Americans are descendants of immigrants from Lebanon, Syria, Palestine, Iraq, Jordan, and Egypt. And we can also observe from their flags, they have the same colors. We have black, white, green, and red. And the majority of Arabs are Muslims who are followers of Islam, but millions are Christians also. And lastly, the immigration controversy. There's also a controversy on the immigration. So although the United States has historically been a nation of immigrants policy today is highly controversial. So the debate focused on immigrants' impact on the economy, national security, and American cultural identity. So while some people believe that immigrants make a needed contribution to the viability of the economy, others contend that they are taking jobs away from American citizens and contending that the immigrants, especially illegal immigrants, are an expensive burden on the country's education, healthcare, and social services. And also, there are critics of the current policy that want laws to restrict immigration and stop illegal immigration. And the critics fear that the movement of illegal immigrants across the United States borders threatens the national security, and especially in the war on terrorism. And we are now in the last, the two closing historical issues. So we will discuss first about the development of Americans and secondary schools. So under the two closing historical issues, we have a persistent issue about the teaching about evolution, and lastly the new issue in which talks about the teaching in a global society. Although many historically generated issues remain to be discussed, so in this section closes with the consideration of only two of them. The first one is creationism versus evolution and persistent issue in American education. And the second one is the new phenomenon and the process of globalization and its educational implications. And we will talk first about the persistent issue, in which it's all about the teaching about the evolution. So in 1859, Charles Darwin um, hypothesized in his the origin of species by means of natural selection. That's all existing plants and animals had evolved by gradual modifications that, insofar as the aided survival, were passed on to their offspring as inherited characteristics. And also, the Darwin's theory of evolution provoked the deep controversies in religion, philosophy, and education. So, for many Christians, evolution challenged the biblical account of creation found in the first book of the Bible, the Genesis, that God created all species as they now exist. Although some theologians interpreted Genesis allegorically, um, Christian fundamentals rejected the theory of evolution. And lastly, the new issue in which teaching in a global society. Today, the term globalization as a multidimensional process is generating profound economic, environmental, social, communications, entertainment, and educational interactions between people of different countries, races, ethnicities, and languages that cross national boundaries. So, teachers and students are familiar with the development of worldwide communications um, in reporting fast breaking news and providing entertainment and coverage for or of sports, diffusing information and making it possible for people to communicate directly with each other through rapid means of informal communication such as the internet and email. So we are done discussing about the chapter 5, and thank you everyone for listening. God bless us all, and once again, good evening.